The wind moaned across the cracked plains of Dust-Whipped Valley like a dying hymn, dragging dust and memory in its wake. Sunlight spilled harsh and blinding across the dry earth, baking every bone-dry fence post and curling strand of tumbleweed. From the front steps of his ranch house, Jedediah Quinn watched the horizon with quiet eyes the color of river rock, pale and unmoved. He was a man weathered by more than years. His silence carried the weight of old scars and older ghosts. He didn't speak when the riders came. 5 men, all young and wild-eyed, kicked up a serpent's tail of dirt behind them as they galloped down the slope toward the ranch. They wore white hats, gleaming revolvers, and the smug certainty of those who believe they can't be touched. Their leader, Clay Maddox, dismounted first. He was lean and sharp-jawed, his boots too clean, his smirk too loud. Jedediah didn't flinch. He stood with one hand resting on the rail, the other hanging by his side, thumb near the knife tucked into his belt, not drawn, just resting, like an old instinct waiting to stretch. "Afternoon, old man," Clay drawled. "Dust whip's looking dry. Makes a man thirsty for answers." Jed said nothing. Clay stepped forward, tilting his head. "Word is you're hiding something. Something valuable." Jed's jaw tightened. "Cattle. Gold. Maybe a man you shouldn't be keeping." Clay smiled, but there was no mirth in it. "See, my brother swore he left something with you before the law strung him up, and now I'm here to collect." Jed finally spoke, voice rough as gravel. "Your brother was a liar and a thief. I don't keep company with either." A silence fell heavy as thunderclouds. Clay's eyes darkened, the charm bleeding from his face. "You sure you want to be disrespectful in front of your neighbors?" He turned, gesturing behind him toward the dusty stretch, where the town of Lantry Hollow sat quiet under the noonday sun. A few faces peered from behind curtains, from saloon windows, from the cover of silence. "You know how it goes, boys," Clay said, looking back at his gang. "Sometimes you have to knock the truth out of a man." They moved fast. Too fast for Jed's age or instincts. One pinned his arms, another kicked the back of his knees. He hit the dirt hard, and the first blow came down, a boot to the ribs. The knife never left his belt. They beat him slow, deliberate. Fists and boots, laughter and curses. Clay didn't lay a finger on him. He stood by the fence, chewing a toothpick, watching like a man attending a show. When Jed tried to rise, they knocked him back down. Dust turned red beneath his cheek. "Still quiet." One of them sneered, pulling back for another strike. "Wait," Clay said, stepping forward now. He knelt beside the farmer, squinting at his face. "You think silence makes you strong? That's just pride rotting on the vine. You'll talk, old man, or you'll die holding on to nothing." Jed's eye, half-swollen shut, twitched. Blood pooled from his nose. "You don't know what nothing is," he rasped. Clay stood, drew his pistol, and fired once, just over Jed's head. The shot cracked through the air like a gavel. "Let's leave him," Clay said, already turning toward his horse. "Leave him breathing. He might remember where he hid it by morning." They mounted up and rode away laughing, leaving the ranch as they found it, barren, broken, burning in silence. The townsfolk of Lantry Hollow didn't come to help. They watched from behind shutters, doors, fences. Fear had made them quiet, had turned good men into furniture. Except for one. From the edge of the dusty road, Miriam Gage stepped down from her porch. She wore a black dress that had once been beautiful, though the color had faded to a worn charcoal. She carried a basin of water and a cloth folded neat, like she'd been waiting for this. She walked to Jed, her boots crunching on gravel. He didn't move. She knelt, dipped the cloth, and pressed it gently against his temple. "You stubborn old mule," she whispered. "Always had to play the hard man." Blood soaked into the cloth. She worked slowly, silently. Her hands trembled not from fear, but from something deeper, grief born not from the present, but from years past. "I told you Clay would come," she said, voice low. "And I told you this town wouldn't stop him." Jed blinked once, a flicker of pain and something else, regret maybe, or shame. "I should have gone to the sheriff," she murmured. "No point." Jed coughed. "Still bought." Jed nodded. She pressed the cloth to his cheek. "You had time to tell him. You had time to send word." Jed closed his eyes. Miriam leaned closer. Why didn't you? He didn't answer. He couldn't. She sat with him as the sun dipped low and the cicadas began to sing. The desert cooled. Shadows lengthened. Far off, a coyote howled. When Jed finally drifted into sleep, she stayed beside him. She didn't cry. She hadn't in years. But she did speak, so quiet it barely crossed the wind. You said he'd come back one day. You said he never forgot. Her voice cracked like dry bark. Well, she whispered, he better not be late. They began whispering again, like they always did when the air got heavy and the sunsets turned strange. It started 2 days after Jedediah Quinn was beaten and left for dead. Word had spread through Lantry Hollow faster than the dust that rolled down from Crow Ridge. No one said much aloud, but in corners and corridors, behind the saloon bar and beneath the clink of whiskey glasses, they asked the same question in different ways. You remember his boy? Thought he died with the red line. He was the worst of them, or the best, depending on who's telling it. They remembered the name, Reed Quinn, a ghost from another life, draped in blood and legend. 10 years gone, they said. Rode with the Red Line Riders, a gang that struck like thunder and vanished like morning mist. Until Dead Man Creek. That's where the earth swallowed them whole, or so folks claimed. Only bones and empty rifles were ever found. So when a lone rider appeared at dusk, trailing a windless silence behind him, the town hushed in unison. He rode a black gelding with eyes like polished coal and hooves that seemed to disturb no dust at all. His coat was the color of ash, long and frayed at the edges. A rifle jutted from the saddle, worn but clean. And the man, he didn't speak. Not at first. He dismounted slowly outside the Dry Cactus Saloon, boots thudding against the hard-packed dirt like slow drums before a hanging. Eyes turned, but no one moved. The saloon doors creaked as he entered, the piano falling silent mid-song. He stepped to the bar, placed a single silver dollar on the counter, and said, "Where's Clay Maddox?" That was all. The bartender, a jittery man with crooked fingers and crooked loyalty, swallowed hard. Ain't seen him. Not today. The stranger didn't press. He picked up his coin, turned, and ascended the stairs to the upper rooms without another word. The door closed behind him like a grave. That night, Miriam Gage stood on her porch again, arms folded against the breeze. Her eyes hadn't left the horizon since Jed's beating. She didn't blink when the rider passed her earlier, but she'd known. You could feel certain names crawl back into your bones. So when the moon was high and the town quiet, she walked to the Dry Cactus and climbed the stairs. He was standing by the window, lit only by the pale glow of moonlight breaking through lace curtains. He hadn't lit the lamp. He turned when she opened the door, and for a moment, neither of them moved. "Reed," she said, breath-catching. It came out as both a name and a memory. "God help me. It's you." His face had changed. Sharper. Scarred. The lines around his eyes told of cold nights and hard rides, but the eyes themselves, gray like his father's, held something untouched. A flicker of something long buried, not yet dead. He didn't smile. "How is he?" She shook her head. "Alive. Barely." He turned back to the window. "You should have come sooner," she said. "I came when I heard." "No," she said firmer. "You came when you let yourself care again." He said nothing, and the silence between them stretched until it cracked. "He wrote you, you know. Every month. Even when he heard what you'd become." Reed's jaw tightened. "I know. He kept the letters in a box by the stove, in case they ever came back marked or unopened." Reed turned slowly. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because you need reminding." She stepped closer, her voice softening. "You weren't always a shadow." He looked away again, but the walls couldn't hide him. Not from her. 10 years ago, the valley had swallowed a boy. Reed Quinn had been 19, fast with a rifle but faster with anger. A fight outside the saloon. A drunk, a shove, a pistol half-drawn. The shot rang out before Reed even knew he'd pulled the trigger. The man died before he hit the ground. His name was nobody, but he had friends. The law came for Reed with ropes and irons. So he ran. They said he crossed 3 states by sundown, joined with raiders out near the Colorado line. They called themselves the Red Line Riders. Reed didn't ask questions. He rode hard, fought harder. He burned bridges and towns alike. But he never lost his father's letters. Never read them, but never threw them away. Dead Man Creek was their end. Ambushed by cavalry, betrayed by one of their own. Only Reed and 2 others survived. One died from his wounds. The other disappeared into Mexico. Reed wandered, worked cattle, dug graves, hunted outlaws for money, became what people feared, until something inside him hollowed out. And now here he stood, back in a town that had no welcome left for him, standing on the bones of the man who raised him. Miriam stepped toward him. "Why'd you come now?" He met her eyes. "Because Maddox hurt my father. That makes it my debt." Her mouth tightened. "You looking for revenge?" "No," he said. "Justice." She studied him, her voice catching with something unsaid. "That's a fine line, Reed. I've walked worse." Outside, a dog barked somewhere near the church. A bell rang faintly in the breeze. Reed turned from her and walked to the desk. From his satchel, he pulled out a small leather book, weathered, faded, torn at the spine. She recognized it. He set it gently on the table. "He never stopped being my father," he said, "even when I stopped being his son." Miriam's throat tightened. "He knew you'd come back. He believed it." Reed nodded slowly. "That's different." She stared at him, and for a heartbeat, the room was full of ghosts. Then she whispered, "He's waiting." "I'll go," Reed said, "at first light." But he didn't. He left before dawn, without goodbye. No torch, no sound. Just the wind and the rhythm of hooves heading toward a reckoning. The first light of morning cracked over Lawntree Hollow like a match strike across a cold pan. The town stirred to a silence louder than any hymn. Curtains parted. Boots shuffled onto porches. No one spoke. Reed Quinn stood at the eastern edge of town, boots planted in dust, revolver holstered but hand never far. His coat flapped gently in the breeze. Before him, Colt Brewer paced like a tethered dog, spitting and muttering beneath his breath, fingers twitching with nerves and bourbon. "You got something to say it now," Reed called, voice flat, unshaken. Colt's lip curled. "You think Taquine, down one of us, makes you the law now?" "I'm not the law," Reed said, "but I am your reckoning." The crowd had gathered at a distance, dozens now. Women with shawls pulled tight, ranchers with creased hats, boys gripping fence posts like it might keep the world from tilting. Even the preacher stood beside the general store, arms folded, watching. "I didn't touch your daddy," Colt barked, drawing the words like a shield. That was Clay's call. You were there," Reed said, stepping forward. "And you laughed while he bled." Colt's hands twitched. "I ain't got to answer to no ghost, outlaw." Reed's eyes didn't leave his. "You got till the count of 3 to walk away." Colt sneered. 1. Reed didn't blink. 2. Colt moved first. His hand went for his hip, fast as a lizard's tongue. But not fast enough. Reed's revolver cleared leather and fired once, clean and sure. The bullet struck Colt square in the chest. He stumbled back 2 steps, mouth wide with surprise. Then he dropped to the dirt like a bag of grain, eyes still open, gun still holstered. No one cheered. No one ran. They just watched, breathing like they hadn't in years. Reed holstered his weapon and turned without a word, heading back toward town. The preacher gave him a long, steady nod. A man from the bank touched the brim of his hat. A boy whispered something to his sister, eyes wide with something close to awe. Justice had arrived, and it had a face they remembered barely. At noon, the saloon door swung open and Reed stepped inside. The air reeked of smoke, sweat, and the sharp tang of fear. Jed Slate sat hunched at a back table, bottle in one hand, pistol on the other. His eyes were glassy, his fingers trembling. "You don't belong here," Jed muttered as Reed approached. "I go where the sins sleep," Reed replied. Slate stood, or tried to. The chair scraped back and clattered. He raised the pistol, but his hand shook like a branch in a storm. Reed didn't reach for his gun, not yet. Behind the bar, Miriam had entered quietly, her skirts brushing wood. Her eyes met Reed's. Then, like a ghost in a chapel, she moved. "Jed," she said softly, stepping into his line of sight. He blinked. In that blink, Reed moved. The shot was a thunderclap. Slate's pistol flew from his hand and clattered to the floor. He cried out, clutching his wrist, stumbling back into the corner like a whipped dog. "You'll walk," Reed said, stepping closer, "or I'll drag you." "There ain't no jail left," Slate hissed through his teeth. "Then I'll build you one," Reed muttered. Outside, the people gathered again as Reed pushed Slate forward. No cuffs, just rope. No sheriff, just eyes watching justice unfold. Reed led him to a post near the old gallows, the one that hadn't seen a hanging in years, but still stood like a rusted monument to forgotten law. He tied Slate's hands above his head, loose enough not to kill, tight enough to hold. He turned to the crowd. "He stays here till the sun remembers his name." Someone murmured, "He deserves worse." Reed said nothing. He adjusted his coat, turned on his heel, and walked past them like wind over stone. The air was shifting. Above the hills, the sky had begun to brown. A dust storm was gathering far off, crawling like an animal across the desert floor. The horizon boiled with haze. Miriam met Reed outside the general store later that afternoon. Her hands were folded. Her voice came quiet. "There'll be blood if you go after Clay." "There's already been blood," Reed answered. "He's not hiding," she said. "He's waiting." "Good," Reed replied, lifting his hat slightly to wipe the sweat from his brow. "So am I." She looked at him, long and heavy. "You could leave. Let it rest." "I've rested too long," he said, "while men like Clay turned this place into a graveyard." A gust of hot wind rolled down the street, lifting dust into their eyes. The sky darkened at its edges. Somewhere in the hills, a hawk screeched and vanished into the wind. Reed turned away, heading toward the livery. Behind him, Miriam's voice stopped him. "Your father would be proud." He paused, then half-turned, not quite looking back. "I hope so. But I didn't come to make him proud." "Then why?" Reed looked to the darkening sky. "Because someone has to remind this land what justice used to sound like." And with that, he vanished down the alley, toward his horse, toward the storm. The wind screamed down from the canyon like a warning torn from the throat of the land. Dust swirled in angry spirals, hissing across the rocks. The trail to the old silver mine twisted through jagged cliffs and forgotten scrub. The sky above stained copper as the sun dipped behind the hills. Reed Quinn tightened the reins on his gelding and looked ahead, the mine's rotting frame visible against the jagged mouth of Devil's Canyon. Somewhere in those dark shafts, Clay Maddox waited, cornered, coiled, and not alone. "You don't have to do this," Miriam said, standing at the base of the slope behind him. She had followed him, breathless and silent until now. "You've already lost your soul once. Don't bury it with him." Reed didn't turn. "He took my father's bones," he said softly, eyes fixed on the mine, "and scattered them across this land like ashes in the wind. I'll make him feel each one." Miriam stepped closer, dust catching in the folds of her dress. "You've already made the town remember what right looks like. You've done more than any man had the courage to." Reed reached into his coat and checked the chamber of his revolver. 6 rounds. "Enough. This isn't about the town," he said. "Not anymore." She closed her eyes. "Then go. But promise me one thing." He waited. "When it's done, come back. Don't ride into that canyon and vanish with the rest of them." His eyes softened for the first time since his return. "If there's still a man left when this is over, he'll come back." He turned his horse and rode on, the wind swallowing her reply. The abandoned mine loomed above the canyon like a dead god's mouth. The timbers creaked in the wind, chains hanging like old nooses from rusted pulleys. The rocks were slick with time, the shadows deep enough to bury secrets. Somewhere inside, a rifle shifted. Reed dismounted 50 yards out and moved low, slow. He counted every step like a prayer. His boots crunched on gravel. He crouched behind a crumbled ore cart and waited. "Reed Quinn." A voice rang out, high above and far off. Juno Wex. He was perched up on the ridge beside the shaft, a long-barreled rifle gleaming in the dying light. "You got brass, I'll give you that," Juno shouted. "But you ain't got brains if you came here thinking you'd leave alive." Reed didn't answer. Juno scanned the slope, cocking his rifle. Clay said you'd come. Told me you'd burn this place down if we let you. So we figured we'd let you try. The wind shrieked again. Reed spotted the glint of Juno's rifle scope. He counted, 3 seconds between each scan, 2 seconds between each breath. On the next pass, he moved. A shot cracked and missed by inches, rock exploding beside his head. Reed rolled forward, came up on one knee, and fired. The slug caught Juno in the shoulder. He spun back against the rock with a howl, dropping the rifle. The weapon tumbled, clattering down the ridge to vanish in the dust. Juno clutched his shoulder, eyes wide with pain and disbelief. "Goddamn, you still shoot like the war never ended." Reed stood slowly, breathing steady. "This was never your fight, Juno." "Hell," Juno coughed, spitting blood. "We never had much choice." From the mine's dark mouth, another voice rose, slick, venomous, familiar. "That's the difference between us, Reed." Clay Maddox stepped out slowly, hands empty, eyes burning. His coat was torn, his face streaked with grime, but his grin was just as sharp as ever. "You always thought you had a choice." Reed stepped forward. The space between them shrank with every breath. "I gave you one in Dust Whip," he said. "You chose to beat an old man to the edge of his grave." Clay's jaw twitched. He deserved it. Reed's voice dropped, low as thunder. "Why?" Clay's eyes flicked to the canyon below, then back. "You really want to know?" "I came to hear the truth before I kill you." Clay laughed, short, bitter. "Your daddy, he sold my brother out. Told the marshals where to find him. My brother rotted on a rope, cause of him." Reed's hands clenched. Jedediah never turned anyone over to the law. Clay's grin faded. "I saw the letter. His name signed at the bottom." "You saw what someone wanted you to see." Clay hesitated. For a blink, his mask slipped. Doubt flickered in his eyes. Reed took another step forward. "You beat a man for something he didn't do. You broke bones over a lie. Now you're going to answer for it." Clay looked down, then back up. "We were brothers once." Reed nodded slowly. "Brothers don't beat fathers." The air held its breath. Clay moved first. His hand flew for the revolver at his hip, but Reed had already drawn. The shot echoed through Devil's Canyon, sharp and clean. Clay staggered back, blood blooming across his chest like a flower of fire. He fell to one knee, then to both. The gun clattered beside him, untouched. Reed walked forward and stood over him. Clay's breath rasped. He wasn't supposed to die. Reed stared, unmoving. He just wouldn't stay down. Reed knelt, not with pity, but with finality. "You had a father. You just didn't know how to live with one." Clay's eyes flickered once, then went still. The wind picked up again, howling across the canyon, carrying away the last breath of a broken man. Reed stood alone. The mine behind him creaked. The blood beneath him darkened the earth. He looked to the sky, where the last of the sun slipped below the cliffs. Then he turned back toward the trail, toward the dust, toward whatever pieces of himself were still left to gather. The valley was quieter when Reed returned. The storm had passed, leaving the sky a soft gray wash, and the air tasting faintly of copper. At the ranch, the wind moved gently through the brittle grass, brushing the porch like an old friend come to sit a while. Inside, Jedediah Quinn lay in the bed where he'd first held his son, and now would take his last breath beside him. Reed sat close, one hand wrapped around his father's calloused fingers. Jed's eyes fluttered open, pale and thin, but not afraid. "You came back," he rasped. Reed nodded, voice thick. "Took me long enough." A faint smile cracked the old man's lips. "You look like your mother when you lie." Silence settled around them, warm and final. Jed took one more breath, deep, slow, as if drawing in the whole valley, and let it go without sound. His fingers slackened, and Reed held them a while longer, just to feel the weight of what had passed. They buried him on the slope beneath the cottonwood tree, where the land overlooked Dust Whip Valley, and the light lingered longer at dusk. The townsfolk came, quiet, respectful. Miriam stood near the head of the pine box, hands folded, black shawl pressed against the breeze. Even the preacher came, though he said no words. Reed stayed after the others had gone, his shadow long beside the fresh-turned earth. He knelt and planted a wooden marker, carved with a name and nothing more. Then he stayed kneeling, hat in hand, until the sun dipped low and the crickets began to sing. Miriam watched from the porch. That night, Reed rode out. No goodbyes. No saddlebag of keepsakes. Just a trail ahead and the echo of something unfinished. He vanished into the desert's open mouth, swallowed like so many before him. They say he left that night. Miriam would later whisper to the boy, riding toward the red line where the desert meets the sky. Some say he died out there. Others say he rides still, where fathers whisper to sons in the wind. The boy didn't answer. He was sitting cross-legged on the porch, reading an old letter. The paper yellowed at the edges, the handwriting stiff and slanted. Miriam stepped closer, a gentle smile tugging at her lips. "You'll need a place to stay, won't you?" The boy nodded. She handed him an envelope sealed, bearing Reed's name. Inside it said, **, teach him what I forgot. Start again. **,